Quests, the backbone of RuneScape's lore and storytelling. Throughout the game's history, quests have been used as a structure for unlocking content, introducing characters, and bringing stories to life in... Wait, no, I already used that intro. Here, hold on. Here we are. While storytelling has always been an important part of RuneScape, whether that's the current game or an old school, there are stories that have been neglected and unfinished. A few months ago, I went over the 4 series in RuneScape 3 that had yet to have a proper conclusion. But our counterpart game... well, there's a lot more cliffhangers in Old School that should be discussed. What's up, everyone? This is Destroyer229, and welcome to a special Old School RuneScape episode of the Hotspot. Over the past few months, I've been playing quite a bit of Old School. This was mostly done in preparation for some future Hotspot videos, but it has allowed me to look into Old School's community and see what people want for the game. And what's funny to me is that a lot of discussion on Old School for future content usually involves wrapping up or at least continuing current quest series. Most of which RuneScape 3 had concluded several years, if not over a decade ago. Old School has typically taken 2 approaches when it comes to these types of quest continuations. They either copy the quest almost entirely from its RuneScape 3 counterpart, like While Gothic Sleeps or The Path of Glovery, or it creates an entirely new quest using plot points RuneScape 3 used before, like Sins of the Father using plot points from Branches of Darkmire and the Lord of Vampirium, or Desert Treasure 2 using the Frostenhorn established in the Temple of Sentistan. So today, we're going to take a look at the quest series that both games share and see how any sort of continuation or finale could happen for Old School's quest series. In essence, we'll see whether Old School should or would likely convert already existing quests over, or if it's more likely or preferable for those stories to go in their own direction. Recently, Jagex has taken a vested interest in older series, as can be seen by their 2024 end-of-year survey. So now is the perfect time to go over Old School's and RuneScape 3's overlapping storylines and see what Old School can do with them. So let's begin! We'll start with an easy one, and the series that's gotten the most focus from the Old School team. The Majar series has already deviated from RuneScape 3's version, and Jagex has said on multiple occasions that they want to create their own version of Ritual of the Majar, solidifying its separation of RuneScape 3's story and the involvement of the gods. Realistically, there's no quests left from RuneScape 3 to adapt for this series. The only quest here that isn't in Old School, and isn't just Ritual of the Majar, is the Temple at Sentistan, which is impossible to adapt as the Frostenhorn was destroyed by Sliske during the events of Desert Treasure 2. Now, this doesn't mean that there's nothing left to bring into the series from RuneScape 3. There are several Majoret that have yet to make an appearance who are still alive. Bilrock has been noticeably absent, as either Demonheim would need to be established in some way, or that he's been doing something entirely different in Old School RuneScape's canon. Karshai is still unknown, though, to be fair, he wasn't at the ritual in RuneScape 3's version. Wahisatel hasn't made an official appearance, though Elias White is more than likely his alias, like Ali the Wise is in RuneScape 3, and Trindine, while presumed dead, could still make a return, as in RuneScape 3, she was sealed at Karad Et, and could subsequently make a reappearance should Azanadra be looking for her prior to the ritual. Plus, the Old School team did include a dossier on her in Desert Treasure 2. So while there are no more quests to adapt, there's still plenty of elements that Old School can still bring in, either loosely or more directly, from RuneScape 3. There's only one quest remaining when it comes to the Dragonkin series, and that's the finale, the Chosen Commander. In all honesty, I think it would be perfectly fine to port the quest pretty much one for one. It's one of my favorite quests in RuneScape 3, and was one of, if not the, first true quest finale that RuneScape had. The only change I think would need to be made would be to change up the Bandos Throne Room award at the end of the quest. It's a subpar agility course, which also requires a grapple, which greatly inconveniences the player, so I think changing up the room's usefulness by making it something else, like, say, a combat room against the statues, would be a better recurring reward space. But other than that, Old School should absolutely take this great finale and finish Xanix's story. There's nothing really left to adapt when it comes to the Elves. Song of the Elves functions pretty closely to Plague's End, and in the end of both quests, Prif Dinis is opened. So there's not much to say here. Rag and Bone Man is kind of weird, considering that Old School converted the wish list to just be a standalone quest. But Fur and Seek does continue the same trend, and reveals what the odd old man was working on. Honestly, just porting over Fur and Seek and making its wishlist either a Fur and Seek 2, or just a second part of the quest would work just fine. And the boss fight at the end with the Skeletal Horror can also function as is. It's a relatively simple quest series, and the only adjustments that would need to be done would be a few of the materials needing changes, like Aquanites, since they don't exist in Old School. And also possibly the Skeletal Horror recurring boss fight. I know that players don't want too many dailies to be added to Old School, and the Skeletal Horror is a weekly repeatable fight that always rewards around 10,000 Slayer and 7,000 Prayer experience. So whether this would need to be adjusted in terms of frequency of the fight, or the amount of XP you earned, or just removed entirely and only used as a quest boss fight, would likely need to be closely examined to pass any sort of poll. But it's a simple quest series with an existing conclusion. Honestly, there is nothing to add to Camelot. RuneScape 3's use of the Knights hasn't gone anywhere since 2007, so Old School is free to develop them as they want. As long as Chivalry passes a poll to remove that defense requirement. So, not anytime soon. I would honestly love to see the Temple Knights be decoupled from the Sea Slugs. It's the same as RuneScape 3, where the two ideas are both in the same series, but I would honestly prefer it if we could eventually get a brand new mission from these guys. And as for the Sea Slug problem, please, for the love of God, do something new with it! The Sea Slug storyline jumped from developer to developer. It was weird in Ken's concerns and downright awful in Salt in the Wound. Please, do not kill Mother Malum with a pillar again. I am begging you, Jagex. The Penguin series can honestly go in any number of directions. As of right now, Old School only has Cold War, but it could honestly develop in any number of ways. I could see Hunt for Red Rocktober and Some Like It Cold being ported over, not so much back to the freezer, but I could also see the Penguins going in an entirely new direction with no relation to those quests. The Penguin series was envisioned to be a stop the villain of the week type of adventure, and so it didn't necessarily take itself too seriously or with much thought of a serious threat. So Old School could just roll with the same philosophy and come up with its own Penguin adventures, or it could pivot and make the Penguins a very serious threat to Gielinor. Out of all the storylines we're covering today, the Penguins absolutely have the most flexibility in how they can be developed, and it would be really intriguing to see which way the Old School team goes with it. The Red Axe series kinda took a turn in RuneScape 3 when Mod John A took over the series, starting with Forgiveness of a Chaos Dwarf. It's not bad by any means, but there is a very noticeable tonal shift in the series, with a major focus on Veldeban. I could see either a completely new series of quests continue from Forgettable Tale of a Drunken Dwarf, or we could see the general themes and plot points used in RuneScape 3's quests as references for new ones, like what was done for the Myari. But in any case, I don't see this series being ported over as is. Speaking of the Myari, the Myari series has already adapted various plot points from RuneScape 3 and created its own story out of it. It already uses the branches of Darkmire and the Lord of Vampirum as reference points, and even references the Everlight, which wasn't brought into the game until Archaeology. I'm not sure if Old School should adapt all of the Myari story beats. Venescula's betrayal and attempted attack on Missalin in River of Blood, that might be avoided. But I don't see any reason why Old School would change course from what it's already doing. I've seen quite a bit of conversation concerning Fairy Tale Part 3, and honestly, I can easily see Old School porting over what already exists in RuneScape 3. In fact, discussion on Fairy Tale Part 3 was a big reason why I wanted to do this special episode in the first place. The only issue that really exists for this series is the reward space. The main rewards for finishing this quest in RuneScape 3 was that weeded patches no longer grow back, you get an infinite watering can, and you can access fairy rings without a Drawman staff. Now the first two of those rewards already exist as rewards from Tithe Farm, and the fairy ring reward is already in the game through the Elite Lumbridge tasks. So the main thing that would need to be done would be to figure out a brand new reward or set of rewards for stopping the Fairy Godfather. One idea could be including the tooth-based theme from the quest, as you are assisted by the Tooth Fairy quite a bit, so there are different avenues for theming if nothing else. But otherwise, it's fine just porting over this one as it mostly stands. Honestly, despite the overlap in the first few quests, I can't really see how there can be anything but a completely different conclusion with stopping a mascot. In Old School, the Bow of Tumakin were sealed inside the tomb of a mascot, and it's implied that a mascot is hiding in Menaphos. In RuneScape 3, Menaphos is already opened, and the player had to go through multiple quests to free the Bow. And even then, Scabarus is still hiding as of the release of this video. There's also the fact that Osman is now the Pharaoh of Menaphos, along with a mascot's plan involving the Sanctum of Rebirth, which I cannot imagine Old School ever touching the city of Hell, Ixlarin has only shown up once in Old School, in Ixlarin's Little Helper, whereas we are very well acquainted with him in RuneScape 3 through our adventures in the Underworld during Saliske's game and during our time in While the Desert series is currently ongoing in RuneScape 3 as of this video, beyond the goal of stopping a mascot, I can't see much overlap that Old School could use from RuneScape 3 that isn't already established or would conflict with something Old School has already released. Now, the tricky thing with the Elemental Workshop isn't that there isn't material to cover. It's packaging it in a way that could pass a poll. This is probably the only quest series that would have trouble with Old School's polling system. Now, RuneScape 3 does have two more Elemental Workshop quests, which continue to use the catalytic rooms up to Chaos, and teases the Nature and Astral doors to the workshop. But that's been the extent of the series in RuneScape 3. And Old School's player base are just as, if not more, adverse to solving puzzles than RuneScape 3's, preferring instead to have RuneLight solve for them instead. Which then introduces a dilemma. Either Jagex makes the puzzles unique and incompatible with RuneLight like they did with the glove-free puzzles, and piss off a lot of players, or make the puzzles universal and predictable so that RuneLight can work with them, and defeat the entire purpose of the series. Now, Old School still teases the body room that was released with Elemental Workshop 2, so while there's still room to debate whether Old School will go to runes beyond that, they still need to cover the body room at some point. but whether the players will approve of wanting to go back to the workshop, well, that's an entirely different discussion altogether. There honestly have been zero developments concerning the trolls in RuneScape 3, beyond recontextualizing the conflict to make it part of the tutorial. So there's nowhere from Old School to adapt from, and can only introduce new conflicts like in making friends with Myari. The Gnome series is in an interesting situation. Old School wrapped up the Glow storyline with Monkey Madness 2, and RuneScape 3 has more development in the Gluffrey storyline with the Prisoner of Gluffrey. So the obvious next course of action would be to just adapt Prisoner of Gluffrey, like what was done for Path of Gluffrey. But whether or not that's entirely necessary is up for debate, as the quest focuses a lot on Bullry, who's related to King Bullren of Tree Gnome Village. However, while it expands on the themes of the previous Gluffrey quests, many of those points could be expanded on in an entirely original quest that focuses more on actually infiltrating Arposandra, rather than the side expansion of Gnome Exposition and a prison break around Arposandra. So I envision this going more so the way of the Majar and the Myari series. The Fremennik series is also in a weird place, since Old School's Fremennik Exiles focuses on a Basilisk invasion and resealing Jormungand, whereas RuneScape 3 continues the Dagannoth threat and reuniting the various islands in Glorious Memories and Blood Runs Deep, and to a lesser extent Heroes Welcome. There's nothing contradictory between Old School and RuneScape 3's continuations, but I can see Old School simply branching out and continuing its own version of events. I mean, it'd still be nice to turn King Vargas back into a human though, so some elements could easily make their way over to Old School, but for the most part, I just see a different interpretation on how the end of things will try to play out. The Pirate series is another questline where I can see some further developments coming from RuneScape 3 before it branches off to do its own thing. While nothing's been done with the Pirates since Old School's launch, RuneScape 3 finished the series with 3 additional quests: Rocking Out, A Clockwork Syringe, and Pieces of Hate. Out of all of these, I can see Old School adapting Rocking Out pretty much one for one, as it's a fine continuation that goes into Rabbit Jack's backstory and provides some pretty important context for the rest of the series. From there, I can't see Old School doing more beyond using Clockwork Syringe and Pieces of Hate as reference material, as Clockwork Syringe involves dungeoneering and naval battles, which, may work better with the implementation of sailing, and Pieces of Hate involves Crassians, which don't exist in Old School, more dungeoneering, and several fights that rely on RuneScape 3's combat system to defeat. There are also references to Zautok, but those I can see staying in, as Old School is keeping the mystery of Zautok alive with as recently as Desert Treasure 2.
Do you really think you can save them?
So that I still feel will be an integral part of the Pirates in Old School. Finally, we have the Dragonkin series. I wasn't originally going to include the Dragonkin, as RuneScape 3 doesn't actually have a Dragonkin series. They've mostly been an outside actor that gets involved in other series, like the Majar or the Elder God War series, and most of our interactions are primarily through Karapak, with a few other Dragonkin we see sprinkled in here and there, like Vincedithis and Zorgoth. But Old School has already gone its own way with the Dragonkin with Dragon Slayer 2, and while they seem to be setting up for another appearance in Old School's Ritual of the Majar, there's still any number of directions the Old School team can take them that can lead them down a different path. Whether the stone is still destroyed without Jazz's direct intervention, it's unclear how they may break their curse. Maybe Old School will explore a different path of Ketsi and find a way to cure or eradicate the Dragonkin. I suppose only time will tell. And with that, we've finished the last of the series. Overall, there's certainly a lot of potential for Old School quests to use RuneScape 3 in some way to continue these stories. And even quests that we said should be taken wholesale could add or change some small elements to keep it in line with Old School's vision of Gielinor. But what do you think? Do you agree with this assessment? Do you think certain quests might make for good adaptations into Old School that we didn't cover? Are there certain elements you'd want to see added to these series? How likely do you think these quests would have at passing the player polls? And do you want to see more Hotspot videos specifically on Old School? I mean, RuneScape 3 is certainly my home, but I would be more than happy to make more Old School content if you all are interested. But in any case, thank you all for watching. I hope to see you again soon. So, until next time everyone, take care.